Dawn crept over Dry Creek like a reluctant witness. The auction platform stood waiting in the town square, its rough planks worn smooth by countless boots and broken dreams. Inside the boarding house's smallest room, a mother counted coins while her daughter sat motionless on a horsehair mattress. "Get your dress on," the woman said without looking up. "The blue calico. It's clean enough. Mother, please. You've been nothing but burden since your father died. Time you earned your keep elsewhere." The girl's fingers trembled as she fastened the pearl buttons, each one a small goodbye. Outside, merchants lit coal oil lamps against the reluctant sun. The auctioneer tested his gavel. Crowds gathered like vultures. Behind Jameson's feed store, a lone cowboy dismounted. Coal Drifter had $17.40 to his name. He tied his horse to the split-rail fence and waited, studying the platform through eyes that had seen too much. Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. The auctioneer climbed the platform with practiced ease, his black coat catching the morning breeze. Samuel Pritchard had sold everything from cattle to furniture in Dry Creek. But this morning's merchandise made even him pause. The girl stood beside him, her blue calico dress a splash of faded color against the weathered wood. "Gentlemen," Pritchard began, his voice carrying across the square, "we have here a young woman, strong and capable, ready for honest work. Her mother seeks to place her in suitable employment. Shall we begin at $15? Coal Drifter shifted his position behind the fence, studying the crowd. Rancher Thompson stood near the front, his thick fingers drumming against his money belt. The man owned the largest spread in 3 counties and went through kitchen help like a prairie fire through dry grass. Beside him, Jake Morley from the Silver Dollar Saloon whispered something to his companion that drew ugly laughter. The girl kept her eyes forward, fixed on some distant point beyond the town's boundaries. Her hands hung at her sides, deliberately still, though Cole could see the slight tremor in her shoulders. She couldn't be more than 20, maybe younger. The same age his sister would have been. Had she lived past that winter fever? $20, Thompson called out, his voice thick with authority. Girl looks strong enough for kitchen work. My cook needs help with the washing. 25, Morley countered, smoothing his waxed mustache. She'd do well serving drinks. Customers like a pretty face. Cole's jaw tightened. He'd seen what became of girls who served drinks in Morley's establishment. His weathered hand moved unconsciously to his vest pocket, fingers finding the canvas pouch hidden there. $17.40. 3 months of breaking horses, mending fences, and eating beans to save every penny for seed corn and supplies. The girl's eyes finally moved, scanning the crowd with a desperate kind of hope. They passed over Thompson's calculating stare, flinched away from Morley's leer, searched the faces of townspeople who suddenly found the ground fascinating. When her gaze swept past the feed store, it caught Cole's for just a moment. He saw resignation there, mixed with a dignity that refused to break. 25 going once, Pritchard announced, raising his gavel. Cole pulled the money pouch from his pocket, weighing it in his palm. He'd come to town for supplies, flour, salt, maybe some coffee if the prices were fair. His farm barely survived last season's drought. Without seed corn, next year would finish him. But that look in her eyes, he'd seen it before, in a mirror, after his brother took everything and left him with nothing but debts and shame. 25 going twice. The words came before Cole could stop them, cutting clean through the morning air. $17.40. The crowd turned as one, searching for the source of the odd bid. Cole stepped out from behind the fence, his boots striking the wooden sidewalk with deliberate steps. His worn hat shadowed his face, but his voice carried clear and steady. That's all I have, but it's honest money. Morley laughed, a sharp sound like breaking glass. Boy, that won't even cover. It's all I have, Cole repeated, moving through the crowd that parted before him like wheat before wind. He reached the platform and looked up at Pritchard, then at the girl. Every cent to my name. Take it or leave it. Thompson snorted. $30. Let's end this foolishness. But Cole had already climbed the platform steps. He stood there, not tall but solid, like a fence post driven deep. The morning sun caught the silver threads in his dark hair, the deep lines around his eyes that spoke of long days under harsh skies. He pulled the pouch from his pocket and held it out to Pritchard. $17.40, he said once more. Then, loud enough for everyone to hear, "But I'm not buying a person. I'm buying a person's freedom to choose." The square fell silent except for the wind rattling the feed store sign. The girl turned to look at him fully for the first time, her mouth slightly open in surprise. Pritchard stood frozen, gavel raised, uncertain how to proceed with this break in protocol. Cole addressed the girl directly, his voice gentle but carrying nonetheless. "You can come with me to my farm, work if you choose, leave whenever you want, or you can walk away right now. Either way, after this, nobody else gets to bid on you like livestock." Her mother's voice shrilled from below. "Take Thompson's 30. Don't be a fool." But the girl's eyes never left Cole's face. She saw something there. Not ownership, not hunger, not calculation. Just a tired kind of recognition. One broken soul acknowledging another. "1740, she whispered. Then louder. "I accept his bid." Pritchard's gavel fell with the finality of a coffin lid closing. The crowd erupted in confused murmurs. But Cole had already turned away, descending the steps. He paused at the bottom, looking back at the girl still standing above. "Name's Cole Drifter. Got a wagon behind the feed store when you're ready." He walked away without waiting for an answer, the empty money pouch hanging loose in his hand, every step taking him further from solvency and closer to something he couldn't yet name. Behind him, the girl gathered her courage like scattered coins and followed, leaving her old life on that platform in the rising dust of a dry Texas morning. The silence that followed Cole's declaration seemed to stretch across the entire town square like a held breath. $17.40. Not even enough for a good saddle, let alone a human being. Yet there he stood, this weathered cowboy with his empty money pouch, having just changed everything with those simple words, "I'm not buying a person, I'm buying a person's freedom to choose." Pritchard the auctioneer looked from Cole to Thompson to Morley, his gavel still raised uncertainly. The rules of auction were clear, highest bidder won, but this wasn't how these things were supposed to go. The girl wasn't supposed to have choices. She was supposed to go with whoever paid the most, do whatever work they demanded, be grateful for the opportunity. "The bid stands at $17.40, Pritchard finally managed, his voice cracking slightly. "Do I hear 18? Thompson's face had gone red as a sunset. "This is preposterous. The boy doesn't even have enough to—" "I have what I have," Cole interrupted, his voice carrying that same steady certainty. "Every cent honestly earned. Question is whether anyone else wants to bid against a man's entire savings for the right to deny this woman her freedom." The crowd began to murmur, shifting restlessly. Some of the women who'd been watching from shop doorways moved closer, their faces showing a mixture of curiosity and something that might have been hope. The men looked uncomfortable, caught between their sense of how things ought to be and this sudden disruption of the natural order. Morley smoothed his waxed mustache one more time, calculating. $20, he said finally, but his heart wasn't in it. The game had changed. This wasn't about acquiring cheap labor anymore. It had become something else, something that made them all look at themselves a little too closely. Cole turned to face the saloon owner directly. "You bidding for her freedom too, or you bidding for ownership?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Morley's face darkened, but he said nothing more. Neither did Thompson. Neither did anyone else. $17.40. Going once. Pritchard called out, his voice stronger now, as if he'd decided something. Going twice. The gavel came down with a crack that seemed to echo off the buildings. Sold. Margaret Mills was at the platform's edge before the echo died, her thin hand extended palm up. "My money," she said flatly, not looking at her daughter. not acknowledging what had just happened beyond the transaction itself. Cole descended the platform steps and handed over the canvas pouch without ceremony. Margaret's fingers closed around it greedily, and she was already turning away when Cole spoke again. "The bill of sale, if you please." Pritchard had been writing it out automatically, the formal transfer of property that would make everything legal. He held it out to Cole, but the cowboy didn't take it immediately. Instead, he climbed back onto the platform and stood before Grace. "Your name," he said quietly. "I need to know your name for the paper." "Grace," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Grace Mills." Cole nodded, then turned back to Pritchard. The auctioneer held out the document again, and this time Cole took it. He looked at it for a moment, this piece of paper that said Grace Mills was now his property, bought and paid for with $17.40. Then, deliberately, he folded it and tucked it into his vest pocket. "No," he said when Pritchard started to protest about procedures. "This paper says I own her, which means I can do what I want with it. What I want is for Miss Mills to know she's free to choose her own path." He turned back to Grace, who stood frozen on the platform like she'd forgotten how to move. "You can come with me to my farm if you want. There's work needs doing, and I could use the help. Or you can go wherever else you choose. Either way, you're not property anymore. Not mine, not anyone's." Grace stared at him. This strange man who'd just spent everything he had for the right to set her free. She looked down at her mother, who was already walking away, counting coins as she went. She looked at the crowd, some hostile, some confused, a few showing glimmers of admiration for what Cole had done. Then she looked back at Cole himself, standing there patient as a stone, waiting for her to make the first real choice of her adult life. She started, then stopped. 20 years of being told she was worthless. A burden. Something to be sold off. It didn't disappear just because one man said she had value. "I don't have anywhere else to go." "Then come with me," Cole said simply. "We'll figure out the rest as we go." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and followed him down from the platform. The crowd parted reluctantly, and Grace heard the comments as they passed through, some cruel, some merely curious. "Fool boy. Waste of money. What's he planning to do with her?" She kept her eyes down, focused on the back of Cole's worn boots as they made their way through the square. The wagon waited behind Jameson's feed store, a simple buckboard with iron-rimmed wheels and a pair of patient horses. Cole checked the harness with practiced movements, tightening a strap here, adjusting a buckle there. Grace stood uncertainly beside the wagon, her few possessions, everything she owned in the world, wrapped in a piece of burlap her mother had grudgingly given her that morning. "You can put that in the back," Cole said, gesturing to her bundle. She set it carefully among the supplies already there. A bag of flour, some seed corn, a tin of coffee. The necessities of frontier life, purchased before he'd known he'd be spending his last cent on something else entirely. He came around to the wagon's side and held out his hand to help her up onto the seat. She hesitated, then took it. The first time in her memory that a man had offered her assistance without expectation of something in return. His hand was calloused and warm, steady as he helped her climb up. "What do you want from me?" she asked suddenly, the question bursting out before she could stop it. "Men don't spend their last money on women they don't want something from." Cole walked around to the other side of the wagon and climbed up beside her, taking the leather reins in his hands. He was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider his words carefully. "My farm's struggling," he said finally. "It's 40 acres of dirt that barely wants to grow anything, with a cabin that leaks when it rains and a barn that's more hope than structure. I've been working it alone for 3 years, and I'm barely keeping ahead of failure." He clicked his tongue at the horses, and the wagon began to roll forward. "I could use help, someone to share the work, maybe see things I'm missing. But more than that." He paused, guiding the horses onto the main road leading west out of town. "More than that. I reckon I saw something of myself up on that platform. Someone who'd been valued at less than they were worth. Someone who deserved better than what they were getting. So this is charity? No. His voice was firm. This is partnership. If you want it, you work. I work. We share what comes of it. You want to leave, you leave. You want to stay, you stay. But either way, it's your choice to make. Grace turned to look back at Dry Creek as they rolled away. The buildings already starting to shrink with distance. Somewhere in that town, her mother was probably already spending Cole's money. Somewhere, Thompson and Morley were probably complaining about the disruption to the natural order of things. But here, on this wagon seat beside a man who'd bought her freedom instead of her servitude, Grace felt something she hadn't experienced in so long she'd almost forgotten what it was called. Hope. The wagon wheels found every rut and stone on the trail leading west from Dry Creek. 3 hours they'd been traveling. 3 hours of silence broken only by the creak of leather harnesses and the occasional snort from Cole's mare. The girl sat rigid on the bench seat, her hands folded in her lap like she was sitting in church, though Cole suspected she hadn't seen the inside of one in years. He kept his eyes on the trail ahead, giving her space to breathe without the weight of expectation. The landscape grew more desolate with each mile, the green patches near town giving way to scrub brush and yellow grass that spoke of hard soil and scarce rain. A jackrabbit bolted across their path, making the mare sidestep, and the girl's hand instinctively grabbed the wagon's side. "Easy," Cole said, though he wasn't sure if he meant it for the horse or his passenger. "We're almost there." There appeared as they crested a low rise. Cole felt his shoulders tighten, seeing his place through her eyes. The cabin squatted against the landscape like it was apologizing for existing. Unpainted boards gone gray with weather, a roof that needed patching before winter, a barn that leaned slightly east as if tired of fighting the prevailing winds. The garden plot was mostly dust with a few struggling tomato plants. A single cottonwood tree provided the only shade, its leaves rustling with a sound like dried paper. The girl said nothing, but Cole caught her slight intake of breath. Not disappointment exactly, but something like recognition. She'd known poverty before. "It's not much," he said, pulling the wagon up beside the cabin. "But it's honest. No liens, no debts. Every board and nail earned fair." She climbed down before he could offer help, her feet raising small clouds of dust. The chickens scattered from their scratching, regarding the newcomer with suspicious eyes. The milk cow, Sadie, looked up from where she was tethered near the barn, then went back to chewing her cud. Cole grabbed the girl's small bundle from the wagon, everything she owned wrapped in a piece of burlap. It weighed almost nothing. He pushed open the cabin door, its leather hinges creaking, and gestured for her to enter first. The main room was simple but clean. A cast-iron stove dominated one corner, its pipe running up through the roof. A table he'd made from planks and sawhorses stood in the center, surrounded by 2 mismatched chairs. Shelves held a few dishes, some preserved goods in jars, a tin of coffee. A doorway led to what had been his bedroom. "This is yours," he said, moving to the doorway. The room held a rope bed frame with a straw tick mattress, a small dresser with a cracked mirror, and a wooden crate serving as a bedside table. He'd placed a kerosene lamp there that morning, filling it fresh though oil was dear. "I'll take the barn. Got a good spot in the loft, away from the animals." She stood in the doorway, one hand on the rough frame. "You're giving me your bed. You need a proper place. The barn's fine for me. Slept in worse." He set her bundle on the dresser. "There's a water pump out back. Privy's beyond that. I'll show you everything proper in the morning." She moved into the room slowly, like she was walking through someone else's dream. Her fingers trailed across the quilt on the bed, patches of faded fabric sewn together with careful stitches. She stopped at the dresser, touching its surface, then the bed frame, then the wall itself. "What are you doing?" Cole asked, not unkindly. "Making sure it's real." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "That no one can come take it away. Sell it out from under me while I'm at market. Like... She stopped, pressing her lips together. Cole understood. He'd felt the same way his first night here, after losing everything to his brother's schemes. It's real, and it's yours as long as you need it. She turned to face him then, and he saw tears threatening, but she blinked them back, that dignity still holding. I don't even know how to thank you. No thanks needed. You hungry? Got beans soaking since yesterday. Can have them ready quick with some cornbread. They ate at the rough table as the sun set through the single window, painting the room orange and gold. The beans were simple, flavored only with salt pork and an onion from the garden. The cornbread was coarse, made with the last of his cornmeal, but she ate like it was a feast, careful and deliberate, savoring each bite. Tomorrow, Cole said, scraping his plate clean. I'll show you the routine. Chickens first. They're easiest. Then we'll see about the garden. What can be saved? Sadie needs milking twice a day, but she's gentle. I don't know how to do any of that. Neither did I. Once. Had to learn when I came out here. The land teaches you, if you're patient enough to listen. She helped him clean the dishes, working beside him in comfortable silence. He showed her where things went, the rhythm of the small household. When full dark came, he lit the kerosene lamp for her, adjusting the wick to burn steady without smoking. I'll be in the barn if you need anything. Just holler. He paused at the door. What should I call you? Never did get your name. She hesitated, like she was deciding whether to give him something true or something made up. Finally, just... Call me girl for now. I'm not ready to be who I was before. Cole nodded. He understood that too, the need to leave an old self behind. Good night then, girl. He crossed the dusty yard to the barn, climbing the ladder to the loft where he'd spread fresh hay and an old horse blanket. Through the cracks in the barn walls, he could see the lamp glowing in the cabin window. He thought about the $17.40, about the seed corn he wouldn't be buying, about the winter coming with no supplies laid in. Then he thought about that look in her eyes when she touched the table, realizing it was something permanent, something no one could sell away. He'd given her that. Maybe it was worth more than seed corn. Morning came with the rooster's crow, as it always did. Cole was already up, had been for an hour, watching the sun creep across the horizon. He saw the lamp go out in the cabin, saw her emerge, wearing the same blue calico but with her hair freshly braided. She stood on the step, looking around like she was seeing the place new. Morning, he called from beside the chicken coop. Ready to learn? She came over, stepping careful around the dried mud and stones. The chickens were already fussing, knowing feeding time was near. Cole had the bucket of cracked corn ready. Secret with chickens, he said, is to move slow and talk soft. They're skittish creatures, but they want to trust you. Hold out your hand. Let them see what you've got. He demonstrated, scattering corn in a wide arc. The hens came running, pecking and squabbling. The rooster stood apart, proud and watchful. Now, gathering eggs is different. Have to reach under them while they're sitting. They don't like it, but if you're quick and gentle, they tolerate it. She watched him retrieve 3 eggs from the nesting boxes, noting how he distracted each hen with his left hand while reaching with his right. Your turn, he said, stepping back. Her first attempt sent the hens squawking and flapping off the nest. The second wasn't much better, but on the third try, she managed to retrieve a warm brown egg, holding it up like a prize. See, Cole said, and for the first time since leaving town, he smiled. You're not useless. You just hadn't met the right teacher. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw something shift in her expression. Not trust yet. That would take time, but the possibility of it. The beginning of something neither of them could name, but both recognized as necessary. What's next? She asked, carefully placing the egg in the basket. Next, we see if you can convince Sadie to share her milk. She's particular about who she allows near her udder, but something tells me you two might get along. They walked toward the barn together, the morning sun warming their backs, the day's work stretching ahead like a promise. The land was barren, the future uncertain, but for the first time in longer than either could remember, neither of them felt alone. The girl paused at the barn door, looking back at the cabin. Her fingers unconsciously mimicked the motion from last night, touching the rough wood of the doorframe like she was memorizing its reality. "It's still there," Cole said gently. "We'll be tomorrow too." She nodded, then followed him into the barn's shadow, ready to learn what the land had to teach. A week passed in a rhythm of small failures and smaller victories. The girl's hands, soft from years of indoor work, blistered from the pump handle and grew raw from the lye soap. She dropped eggs, spilled the milk bucket twice, and once forgot to latch the chicken coop, leading to an hour-long chase through the scrub brush. But Cole never raised his voice, never showed impatience. He'd simply demonstrate again, his weathered hands moving with the unconscious grace of long practice. "Sadie likes a firm touch," he explained for the third time that week, positioning the three-legged milking stool beside the patient cow. "Not rough, but confident. She needs to know you're sure of yourself, even if you're not." The girl watched him work, the steady streams of milk ringing against the tin pail. His hands moved in rhythm, and he hummed something low and tuneless that seemed to calm the animal. When he finished, he stood and gestured to the stool. "Your turn." She'd tried every morning since arriving, and every morning Sadie had sidled away, switched her tail in irritation, or simply refused to let down her milk. But this morning felt different. Maybe it was the way the early light slanted through the barn doors, or how her hands had finally stopped shaking when she approached the cow. She settled onto the stool, placed the pail, and reached for Sadie's udder. "That's it," Cole said softly. "She's listening to you now. Feel that she's deciding whether to trust you." The girl could feel it. A subtle relaxation in the cow's stance, a small shift of weight. She squeezed gently, the way Cole had shown her, and was rewarded with a thin stream of milk, then another and another. The pail began to fill, the foam rising white and rich. She found the rhythm, that steady pull and release, and suddenly understood why Cole hummed. It was like a conversation, a back and forth between human and animal. When she finished, the pail was 3/4 full, the most she'd ever managed. She stood, triumphant, and caught Cole smiling. Not the small, careful smiles he'd given before, but something genuine and warm. "See," he said, "you're not useless. You just hadn't met the right teacher." The words, the same ones he'd used that first morning with the eggs, suddenly struck her as funny. She laughed, surprising herself with the sound. How long since she'd laughed? She couldn't remember. The sound echoed in the barn, startling a dove from the rafters. "I suppose Sadie's the teacher, not you," she said, still smiling. "True enough. Animals teach us more than we think, if we pay attention." She carried the milk to the cabin, walking carefully to avoid spilling. Cole had shown her how to strain it through cheesecloth, how to lower it into the cool darkness of the root cellar. As she worked, she found herself humming the same tuneless melody he'd used. Her hands, despite the blisters and calluses forming, moved with increasing sureness. That afternoon, while Cole worked on repairing the garden fence, she noticed his shirt hanging on the peg by the door. The sleeve was torn at the shoulder seam, a long rip that would only get worse with wear. She'd seen her mother's darning egg in the dresser drawer, along with a precious paper of needles and some linen thread. Without thinking too much about it, she set to work. The familiar motion of the needle soothed something in her. This she knew how to do, had learned at her grandmother's knee before everything went wrong, before her father died and her mother turned bitter as winter bark. She made tiny, even stitches, reinforcing the seam so it would hold through hard work. When she finished, she examined her work with a critical eye, then folded the shirt and placed it back on the peg. Cole found it that evening when he came in for supper. He stopped, fingering the repair, then looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. You didn't have to do that. You didn't have to give me your bed, she countered, stirring the pot of beans on the stove. Or teach me everything. Or, she stopped, not sure how to say, buy my freedom, without the words sticking in her throat. He put on the shirt, testing the flexibility of the repair. Good work. Better than I could do. My grandmother taught me, before, when she paused, then found herself continuing. Before my father died, he was a good man, worked at the mill until his lungs gave out from the cotton dust. After that, Mother changed. Said the world owed her better than she got. Started seeing me as something to trade for that better life. Cole sat down at the table, his movements careful, like he was afraid of startling her into silence. How old were you when your father passed? 15. 5 years ago now. Though it feels like yesterday and forever ago all at once. She ladled beans into 2 bowls, added cornbread to each plate. Mother tried different things, washing, sewing, but she said I was eating more than I earned. Said I was the reason we couldn't get ahead. They ate in silence for a few minutes, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The evening light painted long shadows across the floor. Finally, Cole spoke. My brother Samuel was supposed to be the successful one. Older, smarter. Everybody said, Father left him the farm back in Missouri, trusted him to take care of the family land. He pushed beans around his bowl. Sam had bigger ideas. Convinced me to sign papers. Said it was for improvements. Turned out I was signing away my inheritance. He sold everything, took the money, headed east to make his fortune. Left me with debts I didn't even know existed. That's why you're here. Only place I could afford to start over. Bought this claim with the little I had hidden away. Money from breaking horses Sam didn't know about. Been 3 years now. Some days I still wake up angry. Other days, he looked around the simple cabin. Other days I think maybe Sam did me a favor, forced me to find out who I am when everything else is stripped away. The girl considered this. And who are you? Still figuring that out. But I know I'm not my brother. That's something. After supper, they developed what would become their routine. She would clean the dishes while he tended to the evening chores, checking the animals, securing the barn, banking the fire in the stove. Then they would sit on the porch, watching the sun set behind the distant hills, and trade stories like cards in a game where both players won. She told him about the boarding house where she'd lived with her mother, the small room that smelled of cabbage and disappointment. About the other girls who'd been sold or traded, married off to men 3 times their age, or simply disappeared one night, their few possessions divided among those who remained. He told her about Missouri summers, thick with humidity and fireflies, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, his father's patient hands guiding his on the reins, about the girl he'd almost married before Sam's betrayal made him too poor to offer her anything. Do you miss her? The girl asked one evening, a week into their new routine. I miss who I thought she was. But when the money was gone, so was she. Married the bank manager's son within a month. He stretched his legs out, boots scuffing the porch boards. Made me realize I'd been in love with an idea, not a person. And now I know the difference between what looks valuable and what is. She understood he meant the farm, the simple life he'd built, but something in his glance suggested maybe he meant more. She wasn't ready to examine that too closely, so she changed the subject. Tomorrow, will you show me how to use the butter churn I saw it in the barn? If we can get enough cream from Sadie, she's been holding back lately. Stubborn thing. Maybe she just needs to be asked nicely, the girl said, and was rewarded with one of Cole's rare full smiles. As the stars emerged, she noticed she'd stopped checking over her shoulder, stopped listening for footsteps that might drag her back to some other life. The land was hard, the work harder, but there was something clean about it, something honest. When her hands ached from the day's labor, it was an ache she'd earned. When she fell into bed exhausted, it was the exhaustion of purpose, not despair. Girl, Cole said suddenly, then stopped. That doesn't seem right anymore. Calling you that. She was quiet for a long moment, considering. Names had power. Her mother had used hers like a curse, spitting it out with disappointment. The men at the auction had turned it into something dirty. But here, under these vast western stars, maybe she could reclaim it. Grace, she said finally. My name is Grace. Cole nodded slowly, like he was accepting something precious into his keeping. Grace, he repeated. It suits you. They sat a while longer, comfortable in the cooling night air. Inside the cabin, the kerosene lamp cast a warm glow through the window. The horses shifted in the barn, settling for the night. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack, the sound lonely but not threatening. Same time tomorrow, Grace asked, standing to go inside. Same time tomorrow, Cole confirmed. Sadie will be waiting. As she prepared for bed, Grace caught herself humming again, that tuneless melody that seemed to belong to this place, to this new rhythm of days. Through the window, she could see Cole's lantern moving toward the barn, a small light in the great darkness. But it was enough, more than enough. It was the beginning of something she was only just learning to name. The morning arrived heavy with unspoken tension. Grace had known this day would come, had seen Cole counting the dwindling supplies, rationing the coffee, scraping the last of the flour from the barrel. But knowing hadn't prepared her for the tight feeling in her chest when he announced over breakfast that he needed to go to town. Just for supplies, he said, not quite meeting her eyes. Be back before sundown. She nodded, keeping her hand steady around her coffee cup. The liquid had been stretched thin with chicory root, but she'd grown to like the bitter taste. What needs doing while you're gone? Same as always. Chickens. Sadie, check the garden for beetles. He paused, then stood and walked to the corner where his Springfield rifle rested. I want you to keep this close. I don't know how to shoot. Don't need to shoot. Just need to show you have it. Coyotes have been ranging closer, looking for easy meals. They see the rifle, they'll think twice. He demonstrated how to hold it, how to work the lever action. But it's just for coyotes. Understand? Any person comes by. You tell them I'll be back directly. The unspoken hung between them, her legal status, whether anyone could still claim rights to her, whether the sale had been proper. Grace took the rifle, surprised by its weight. Just coyotes, she repeated. Cole loaded the wagon with what little they had to trade, some eggs packed in straw, a crock of butter she'd finally managed to churn successfully, herbs from the struggling garden. He moved with deliberate slowness, and she recognized he was delaying, uncertain about leaving. I'll be fine, she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Managed 20 years before I met you. That's not... He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. I just want you to know I'm coming back, no matter what. Even if the supplies cost more than we have. Even if... He stopped again, frustrated with words that wouldn't come right. I'm coming back. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that steady gaze, those work-rough hands that had never grabbed or demanded. But 20 years of disappointment had taught her that men who left didn't always return, no matter their promises. Sundown, she said simply. He climbed onto the wagon seat, clicked his tongue at the horses. As the wagon rolled away, raising dust in the morning light, Grace stood in the doorway until she couldn't see him anymore. Then she picked up the rifle and began the day's work. The morning passed quickly enough. The chickens knew her now, came running when she appeared with the feed bucket. Sadie gave her milk without fuss, and Grace found satisfaction in the full pail, the foam thick and yellow with cream. She weeded the garden, picking beetles off the tomato plants and dropping them into a jar of kerosene. It was the afternoon that stretched long and empty. Every sound made her look up. Was that wagon wheels? But it was just wind in the cottonwood. Thunder from an approaching storm. No, just Sadie bumping against the barn wall. She caught herself standing at the edge of the property, shading her eyes against the sun, searching the horizon for dust clouds that meant someone was coming. "Stop it," she told herself firmly. "He said sundown." She was feeding the chickens their afternoon scratch when she heard actual wagon wheels. Her heart leaped, then sank when she saw it wasn't Cole's wagon but a neat buggy painted black with yellow wheels. A woman held the reins, older, wearing a practical brown dress and a sunbonnet that had seen better days. Grace grabbed the rifle, holding it awkwardly across her body the way Cole had shown her. The woman pulled up near the cabin and climbed down with surprising agility for her age. "No need for the artillery, child," the woman said, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. "I'm Mrs. Patterson from the Double P Ranch. Neighbor to the south, though neighbor out here means 5 miles as the crow flies." Grace lowered the rifle but didn't set it aside. "Mr. Drifter isn't here." "I know. Saw him heading to town this morning. Thought you might like some company." Mrs. Patterson reached into her buggy and pulled out a covered basket. "Brought some bread, real bread, with white flour and yeast. Figured you might be tired of cornbread by now." The smell that emerged when Mrs. Patterson lifted the cloth was enough to make Grace's mouth water, but she stayed where she was, uncertain. People didn't just give things away. There was always a cost. "What do you want for it?" Mrs. Patterson studied her with sharp blue eyes. "Lord, child, what did they do to you that you can't accept neighborly kindness?" She set the basket on the porch. "I don't want anything. Maybe just a cup of that coffee I smell and some conversation. Gets lonely out here with just my husband and the ranch hands for company." Grace hesitated, then set the rifle against the wall. "Coffee's stretched thin with chicory. Way I prefer it. Too much coffee makes my heart race." They sat at the rough table, and Mrs. Patterson proved to be exactly what she seemed, a rancher's wife starved for female company. She talked about her grown children back east, about the challenges of keeping a garden alive in the dry soil, about which merchants in town were honest and which would cheat you blind. "That where Cole went Dry Creek, Mrs.?" Patterson asked, though something in her tone suggested she already knew. "For supplies." The older woman sipped her coffee. "Heard about what happened at the auction last week. Whole town's been talking." Grace's stomach clenched. "What are they saying?" "Depends who's doing the talking. Some say Cole Drifter's a fool who threw away his seed money on a girl. Others say he did the most Christian thing they've seen in years." Mrs. Patterson's eyes crinkled with what might have been approval. I say it's about time someone stood up to the ugliness that's been growing in that town. You don't think badly of me. For what being sold by your own mother having the courage to accept help when offered?" Mrs. Patterson reached across the table and patted Grace's hand. "Child, I've been out here 30 years, seen all manner of arrangements. What matters is how people treat each other once the dealing's done. He gave me his bed. Sleeps in the barn." "That sounds like Cole Drifter. Man's got more honor than sense sometimes." Mrs. Patterson stood, smoothing her skirts. "I should go before the afternoon gets later. But Grace, that is your name, isn't it? You remember you've got neighbors now? The Double P is always open if you need anything." After Mrs. Patterson left, Grace felt less alone. She went about the evening chores with renewed energy, milking Sadie early so she'd be done before Cole returned. She wanted to be watching when he came back. When he came back, she corrected herself. The sun was hanging low, painting the western sky orange and pink. When she stationed herself on the porch, the rifle leaned against the wall beside her, forgotten. Her eyes strained against the gathering dusk, searching for any sign of movement on the trail. The sun touched the horizon, then sank below it. The sky faded from orange to purple to the deep blue of early night. Still no sign of Cole. Grace's hands clenched in her lap. He'd said sundown. It was past sundown now. Had something happened? Had he taken the money from the traded goods and kept riding? Had he decided the farm was too hard with an extra mouth to feed, or worse, had someone in town convinced him she wasn't worth the trouble that harboring a girl who'd been sold might bring legal problems? She knew how persuasive townspeople could be when they thought someone was disturbing the proper order of things. The first stars were emerging when she finally saw it. A dust cloud catching the last of the light. Her heart hammered as she stood, straining to see. Was it Cole or someone else entirely? Then she heard it. The particular squeak of his wagon's left wheel that needed oiling. The familiar rhythm of his matched horses. She found herself running down the path before she could think better of it, stopping only when she realized what she was doing. She forced herself to walk back to the porch, to stand there casually like she hadn't been sick with worry. Cole's wagon crested the small hill, lanterns swinging from the sides now that darkness was falling. He pulled up beside the barn, and she could see the wagon was full. Sacks of flour and cornmeal. A barrel that probably held salt pork. Other supplies she couldn't make out in the dim light. "Sorry I'm late," he called, climbing down. "Prices were higher than expected. Had to visit 3 different merchants to get what we needed." She wanted to say she hadn't been worried, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, Mrs. Patterson came by, brought bread. That's kind of her. Good people. The Pattersons. He reached into the wagon, pulled out a wrapped bundle. "This is for you." Grace took the bundle, felt the soft give of fabric. In the lantern light, she could see it was calico, not blue this time, but a warm green printed with tiny yellow flowers. Enough for a dress, maybe 2. "Cole, we can't afford, already paid for. And before you argue, it's practical. You need more than 1 dress. And Mrs. Milligan at the dry goods store gave me a good price when I told her it was for you." "You told her about me?" Cole was unloading the wagon, his movements careful and deliberate. "Told the whole town, actually. Made sure everyone knew you're my business partner, that you've got a legal right to be here, working the land same as me. Filed the paperwork at the land office to make it official." Grace clutched the fabric, feeling the tears threaten. "But your reputation. What reputation? I'm already the fool who lost everything to his brother. Now I'm the fool who bought a girl's freedom and made her a partner." "Seems like a step up to me." He said it lightly, but Grace heard the steel underneath. He'd faced down the town's judgment for her, put his name on legal documents, made it clear she wasn't property or servant, but partner. "Thank you," she managed, though the words felt too small for what he'd done. "Had to be done. Can't have people thinking they can come around here causing trouble." He hefted a sack of flour onto his shoulder. "Besides, you've earned it. Place already runs better with you here. Sadie's giving more milk. Chickens are laying better. Even the garden looks less pitiful." They worked together unloading the wagon, storing the supplies in the cabin and root cellar. Cole had bought coffee, real coffee, and sugar, and even a small bag of white flour for special occasions. There was new thread for sewing, a proper thimble, and a package of needles. Practical things, but chosen with thought. As they finally sat down to a late supper of bread and beans, Grace found herself really looking at Cole for the first time. Not as the man who'd bought her freedom, not as her employer or savior, but as a person. He looked tired, dust still clinging to the lines around his eyes. But there was something satisfied in his expression too, like he'd accomplished something important. Were people really talking about the auction? Some, but not as much as you'd think. Turns out Thompson's been running through kitchen girls fast enough that folks are starting to notice. And Morley's had complaints about his saloon. Your mother left town. By the way, took the eastbound stage this morning." Grace didn't know how to feel about that. Relief, sadness. She settled on acceptance. She got what she wanted, then. Seems so. They finished eating in comfortable silence. When Cole stood to head to the barn, Grace found herself saying, "You came back?" He paused at the door, lantern in hand. "Said I would." "I know, but you did. Even though it cost more than expected. Even though people were talking. Even though—" "Grace." He turned to face her fully. "This is my home. Our home now. If you want it to be. Nothing in town could keep me from coming back to it." After he left, Grace sat at the table, running her hands over the green fabric. Tomorrow she would start cutting out a new dress. She would use Mrs. Patterson's bread recipe to try making their own. She would milk Sadie and feed the chickens and tend the garden, all the while wearing a dress that announced to anyone who saw it that she belonged here, that she had chosen this life and it had chosen her back. Through the window, she could see Cole's lantern bobbing as he climbed to the barn loft. She knew now that tomorrow he would emerge at dawn, ready for another day's work. And the day after that, and the day after that. The knowledge settled into her bones like warmth, like safety, like something she was only just beginning to recognize as home. The morning sky hung low and bruised, purple-black clouds massing on the western horizon like an army gathering for assault. Grace had learned to read the weather in her weeks on the farm, the way the air grew thick and still, how the chickens clustered nervously near their coop, the restless stamping of the horses in the barn. But this was different. This had the feeling of something momentous. Cole stood in the doorway of the cabin, studying the sky with deep concern. "Storm coming," he said unnecessarily. "Big one, by the look of it." "The garden," Grace began, thinking of the tomato plants just beginning to set fruit, the beans climbing their poles, the precious corn stalks that represented their hope for next season. "We'll do what we can." He was already moving, grabbing the canvas tarp from the barn. "Help me cover the seedlings first. Then we need to secure everything that can blow away." They worked without speaking, both understanding the urgency. The wind was picking up, sending dust devils spinning across the yard. Grace's green calico dress, the one she'd finished sewing just 3 days ago, whipped around her legs as she helped Cole stretch the tarp over the most vulnerable plants, weighing it down with stones. The chickens were next. Cole reinforced the coop door while Grace shooed the reluctant birds inside. The rooster fought her, wings spread in defiance, until she finally caught him and tossed him unceremoniously through the door. "Sadie," Cole called over the rising wind. The cow was in the pasture, and they needed to get her into the barn. Grace grabbed the rope while Cole approached the increasingly nervous animal. Together they managed to lead her to safety, though she bellowed her displeasure at being confined. The first fat raindrops began to fall as they checked the barn doors, making sure everything was latched tight. Thunder rolled across the plains, so loud it seemed to shake the ground beneath their feet. Lightning followed, brilliant white, illuminating the landscape in stark, momentary detail. "Inside," Cole ordered, but Grace was already running for the cabin. They burst through the door just as the sky opened up entirely, rain falling in sheets so thick they couldn't see the barn just yards away. For a moment, they stood catching their breath, water dripping from their clothes onto the floor. Then a sound like tearing fabric made them both turn toward the window. Through the rain, they could just make out the chicken coop, its roof peeling back like the lid of a can. Cole cursed, the first time Grace had heard him use such language. "If we don't fix it now, we'll lose them all. Coyotes, foxes, hawks, everything will be after them once the storm passes." He was already reaching for his oilcloth slicker when Grace grabbed the second one hanging by the door. "You'll need help." "Grace." "No. We're partners, aren't we?" She was already pushing past him into the storm. The rain hit like fists, cold and hard, driven by wind that tried to knock them sideways. They fought their way to the coop, where the terrified chickens huddled in the corner, already getting soaked. The roof, really just boards and tar paper, had torn free on one side and was flapping violently. "Hold this," Cole shouted over the storm, handing her one edge of the roofing. Grace gripped it with both hands, fighting the wind that wanted to tear it away entirely. Cole grabbed his hammer and the precious blacksmith nails from the emergency supplies he kept in the small shed attached to the coop. They worked together, Grace holding each board in place while Cole hammered. The rain made everything slippery. Twice Grace lost her grip and the board slapped back, once catching Cole across the shoulder. The wind seemed determined to defeat them, gusting so hard that Grace had to brace herself against the coop wall. They were almost done, just one corner left to secure, when Cole's hammer slipped on the wet wood. It came down hard on his left hand. And even over the storm, Grace heard his sharp intake of breath. Blood welled immediately, mixing with the rain to run pink down his wrist. "Let me see," she demanded, but he shook his head, teeth gritted, and drove the last 3 nails home one-handed. Only when the roof was secure did he let her examine the damage. "Inside," she said, and this time he didn't argue. In the cabin, with the door shut against the storm's fury, Grace could properly assess the injury. The hammer had caught him across the back of the hand, tearing the skin and already raising an ugly bruise. She fetched the medical supplies from the shelf, carbolic acid that would sting, cotton bandages that Mrs. Patterson had given them, a clean cloth. "Sit," she ordered, and Cole sank into the chair by the table. She lit the kerosene lamp for better light, then began cleaning the wound. He hissed when the carbolic acid touched the torn flesh but didn't pull away. "You should have let me handle the hammer," Grace said, wrapping the bandage carefully around his hand. "You were doing fine holding the boards. We needed both." He watched her work, something unreadable in his expression. "Where'd you learn doctoring?" "Boarding house. Someone was always hurt, burned from the stove, cut from broken glass. Mother wouldn't pay for a doctor unless someone was dying." She tied off the bandage, neat and secure. "This should heal clean if you keep it dry. In this weather." But he was almost smiling. They became aware, suddenly, of how close they were sitting. Grace's hand was still holding his injured one, ostensibly checking the bandage but really just holding on. They were both soaked through, hair dripping, clothes clinging. The lamplight made everything golden and intimate while the storm raged outside. "Thank you," Cole said softly, "for the doctoring, for helping with the roof, for—" He stopped, seeming to search for words. "I'm not used to having someone stand beside me when things get hard." "Where else would I be?" The words came out before Grace could stop them. "You gave me a place when the whole world said I deserved none. You treat me like I have worth, like my work matters, like I matter." "You do matter." His good hand came up to cover hers where it still held his injured one. "More than you know." The air between them shifted, charged with something that had nothing to do with the lightning outside. Grace found herself leaning forward slightly, drawn by something she couldn't name. Cole's eyes were very dark in the lamplight, fixed on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Grace," he said, and her actual name in his mouth sounded like a prayer. "Cole," she whispered back, using his first name deliberately for the first time. Not Mr. Drifter, not Sir, but Cole. The intimacy of it hung between them. Thunder crashed directly overhead, making them both jump. The moment broke, but something had changed. They pulled apart slowly, Grace busying herself with putting away the medical supplies while Cole tested the flexibility of his bandaged hand. The storm continued for another hour, but its fury was lessening. They sat together at the table, not speaking much but aware of each other in a new way. When Grace made coffee, she automatically added the single spoon of sugar Cole preferred. When Cole noticed her shivering, he fetched a blanket from her room and draped it around her shoulders without being asked. As the rain finally began to ease, they ventured onto the porch to assess the damage. The garden tarp had held, mostly. They'd lost some bean poles and several tomato plants. But the corn survived. The chicken coop roof, ugly with its emergency repairs, had kept the birds safe. Water ran in new channels across the yard, and everything smelled of wet earth and ozone. "We did it," Grace said, surprised by the pride in her voice. "We saved what we could." We did. Cole was looking at her. Not the farm. Together. They stood side by side, wrapped in the blanket she'd pulled large enough to cover them both, watching the storm clouds roll eastward. The sun was trying to break through, sending slanted rays of light across the rain-washed land. Everything looked cleaner somehow, renewed. "My full name," Grace said suddenly, surprising herself, "is Grace Catherine Mills. My grandmother's name was Catherine. She was the only one who ever made me feel like I was worth something. Before she died. I haven't used Mills since the day my mother first tried to sell me to pay rent. Didn't want to be connected to her anymore." Cole was quiet for a moment. Then, "Coleman James Drifter. Coleman was my grandfather's name. James was my father's. I was supposed to carry on the family tradition, take over the family land. Instead, I'm here, starting over with nothing but dirt and stubbornness." "Not nothing," Grace corrected softly. "You have the farm, the animals, the crops we just saved." She hesitated, then added, "You have me." He turned to look at her fully then, his injured hand coming up to touch her face so gently she barely felt it. "Yes," he said simply. "I have you." They stayed on the porch until the sun set, painting the wet world gold and crimson. Grace knew that something fundamental had shifted between them. Like the land after rain, the same but utterly transformed. They were still partners, still working toward survival on this unforgiving land. But now they were something more. Something neither had expected to find when Cole placed $17.40 on an auction platform. When they finally went inside, Cole paused at the door that led to the barn. For a moment, Grace thought he might stay, might suggest that the pretense of separate quarters had outlived its purpose. But he simply said, "Good night, Grace Catherine Mills." "Good night, Coleman James Drifter," she replied, and they both smiled at the formality of it, the intimacy of knowing each other's full names, the promise implicit in that knowledge. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and cool. Through her window, Grace could see stars emerging, brilliance after the rain. Tomorrow they would repair the damage properly, replant what was lost, continue the endless work of survival. But tonight, she lay in her bed, Cole's bed, really, and thought about the way he'd said her name, the way his hand had felt covering hers, the way they'd stood together against the storm and won. Outside, she heard Cole moving in the barn loft, probably checking his bandage, settling in for the night. The distance between them was just boards and air, nothing really, and yet everything. But that too would change. Grace sensed, like the storm that had tested them and passed, leaving them stronger for having weathered it together. Some things, once transformed, could never go back to what they were before. 3 months had passed since the storm, and autumn was painting the landscape in shades of gold and rust. The corn stood tall despite its late planting. The garden had recovered better than expected, and the repairs to the chicken coop had held through 2 more storms. Grace was kneading bread dough when she saw the buggy approaching, a plume of dust rising in the still morning air. She didn't recognize the vehicle at first. It was finer than anything their neighbors owned, with polished black sides and brass fittings that caught the sun. But she recognized the woman holding the reins, the ramrod's straight posture, the familiar set of those narrow shoulders. Her hand stilled on the dough. "Cole," she called, her voice steady despite the sudden racing of her heart. He emerged from the barn where he'd been mending harnesses, took one look at her face, then followed her gaze to the approaching buggy. "Is that my mother?" The words felt strange in her mouth. She hadn't spoken them in 3 months, had almost convinced herself that part of her life was truly over. Cole moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "You don't have to see her. I can send her away." "No." Grace wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron, the one she'd sewn from feed sacks, decorated with small embroidered flowers along the hem. "I need to face this." The buggy pulled up in front of the cabin, and Margaret Mills descended with the same imperious air Grace remembered. She was dressed finer than before, a new dress of burgundy wool, a hat with an actual feather, gloves of soft leather. Wherever she'd gone with Cole's $17.40, she'd done well for herself. "Grace," her mother said, as if 3 months hadn't passed, as if she hadn't sold her daughter on an auction platform. "You're looking robust." Grace felt Cole tense beside her, but she touched his arm lightly. A warning. A request. This was her battle to fight. "Mrs. Mills?" she said, deliberately formal. "What brings you here?" Her mother's eyes flicked to Cole, then back to Grace. "I've come to discuss our arrangement." "We have no arrangement." "Don't be deliberately obtuse, girl. I've established myself in Abilene, running a respectable boarding house, but the initial investment has left me temporarily short of funds. You're working, earning wages. You owe me a portion." Grace almost laughed at the audacity of it. "I owe you. I raised you for 20 years, fed you, clothed you, kept a roof over your head. That debt doesn't simply disappear because you found alternative employment." Her mother's gaze swept over the farm, dismissive. "Though I must say, I expected better. When I heard Cole Drifter had taken you, I assumed he had more to offer than this." She gestured at the simple cabin, the patched chicken coop, the struggling garden. "What exactly did you tell people?" Cole asked, his voice dangerously quiet. It was the tone Grace had heard him use once with a horse trader who'd tried to cheat him. Calm, but with steel underneath. Margaret straightened, chin lifting. "I told them she was hired out for domestic service, a legitimate arrangement that any mother might make for a daughter's benefit. Certainly nothing that would damage my reputation in a new town." "You sold me," Grace said flatly, "on an auction platform. Like livestock. I found you a position. The method was perhaps unorthodox, but you took money for me. $17.40, the exact amount." Grace's voice was rising despite her efforts to stay calm. "You called me useless, a burden, something to be rid of. And now you come here claiming I owe you." Margaret's face flushed, but she maintained her rigid posture. "You're my daughter. The law says. The law says nothing about this." Cole stepped forward, reaching into his vest pocket. He pulled out a folded paper, yellowed and official-looking. "This is the bill of sale from the auction. Your signature, Mrs. Mills, the auctioneer's witness mark. You sold all rights and claims to your daughter for the sum of $17.40. Margaret went pale. "You kept that?" "Course I kept it. Also filed a copy with the county clerk, along with the partnership papers for the farm." Cole's voice remained level, but Grace could hear the anger underneath. "You want to bring the law into this? Let's discuss how selling your daughter at public auction would look to the authorities in Abilene, to your respectable boarders." "She's still my daughter." "No." Grace stepped forward, moving in front of Cole. This was her moment, her words to say. "I'm not your daughter. You ended that relationship the moment you pushed me onto that platform. You made your choice. $17.40 was worth more to you than I was. I did what was necessary. You did what was easy." Grace felt years of suppressed anger rising, but it wasn't wild or uncontrolled. It was clear, sharp, like the first frost of autumn. "When Father died, you could have worked harder. Could have taken in more washing, more sewing. Could have moved us somewhere cheaper. Instead, you decided I was the problem. I was eating too much, costing too much, being too much of a burden. You don't understand what it was like." "I understand perfectly." Grace reached behind her and untied her apron, folding it with deliberate care. Underneath, she wore her green calico dress, clean and pressed, the one she'd made with her own hands from fabric Cole had bought her. "I understand that you saw me as something to trade for your own comfort. But Cole saw me as a person. He gave me choices. Work if I wanted. Leave if I wanted. Stay if I wanted. And you chose this. Margaret's voice dripped disdain. This patch of dirt, this cabin that's barely standing, this man who had to spend his last cent to. Yes! Grace's voice rang clear across the yard. I chose this. I chose work that matters, that builds something instead of tearing it down. I chose a partner who treats me with respect, who values what I contribute. I chose a life where I wake up each morning knowing I'm wanted, not tolerated. She walked to the porch and picked up something she'd placed there earlier, a small cloth purse. Here, she said, holding it out to her mother. $10. Not because I owe you anything, but because I want nothing between us. No debts, no obligations, no claims. Margaret looked at the purse like it might bite her. $10, that's all. It's more than you left me with, more than you thought I was worth beyond what you could sell me for. Grace set the purse on the buggy seat. Take it and go. Don't come back. You can't simply. I can. Grace pulled out another paper, this one crisp and new. Partnership agreement for the Drifter Farm. My name is on the deed now, legal and proper. This is my land too, and you're trespassing. Margaret's face cycled through emotions, anger, disbelief, and finally a cold calculation. She picked up the purse, weighing it in her hand. You'll regret this. When this place fails, when he tires of you, when you're left with nothing, then it'll be my nothing. Grace interrupted. My choice, my consequences, my life. That's more than I ever had with you. Mother and daughter stood facing each other for a long moment. Grace saw herself as she could have been, bitter, grasping, seeing everyone as either useful or useless. She also saw what she'd chosen instead. Hard work, yes, but honest. Partnership instead of ownership. Love, though neither she nor Cole had said the word yet, built on respect and shared labor. If you ever come to Abilene, Margaret said stiffly, don't expect welcome at my establishment. I won't be coming to Abilene, Grace replied. Everything I need is here. Margaret climbed back into the buggy with as much dignity as she could muster. As she took up the reins, she looked back one more time. I did what I thought best. No, Grace said quietly. You did what was best for you. There's a difference. The buggy rolled away, dust rising to obscure it from view. Grace stood watching until it disappeared completely, feeling something inside her chest loosen and finally break free, the last chain binding her to who she'd been before. Cole's hand touched her shoulder gently. You all right? She turned to face him, seeing the concern in his eyes, the ready support. He'd stood behind her, literally and figuratively, letting her fight her own battle but ready to step in if needed. That, more than anything, told her who he was, who they were together. I'm free, she said, and the words carried more weight than they had 3 months ago. Then, he'd bought her freedom with coins. Now, she'd claimed it with her own voice, her own choices, her own strength. You always were, Cole said. Just took some time to remember it. She looked at the cabin, the barn, the garden they'd saved from the storm, the chickens scratched in their pen, Sadie lowed from the pasture, and the corn rustled in the afternoon breeze. It wasn't much by some standards, certainly not by her mother's new standards, but it was theirs, built by their hands, tended by their care, shared in true partnership. The bread, Grace said suddenly, remembering the dough she'd abandoned. It's probably overrisen. Let it, Cole said. He was looking at her with an expression she'd seen growing over the past months, something warm and wondering. Grace Catherine Mills, you just faced down your past and won. The bread can wait. She laughed, surprising herself with how free it sounded. We'll have flatbread for dinner then. I've eaten worse. He paused, then added, that was brave. What you did. It was necessary. She looked down at the bill of sale still in his hand. Could I have that? He handed it over without question. Grace looked at it for a moment. The document that had changed everything. That had brought her from ownership to partnership. From property to person. Then, deliberately, she tore it in half. Then quarters. Then smaller pieces. Letting them fall like snow at her feet. "Don't need it anymore," she said. "I know who I am now." Cole smiled, that full, genuine expression that transformed his weathered face. "And who's that?" Grace looked at him, at the farm, at the wide sky stretching endlessly above them. "I'm Grace Mills, partner in the Drifter Farm. I'm the woman who makes the best butter in 3 counties. I'm the one who saved the chickens in a storm. I'm—" She stopped, gathering courage for the next words. "I'm the woman who loves you, Coleman Drifter, if you'll have me." The words hung between them like morning glory vines, delicate but strong, reaching toward something solid to hold on to. Cole's eyes widened, then softened. "Grace," he said, and her name in his mouth was answer enough. But he said the rest anyway. "I've been yours since the moment you climbed down from that platform. Just been waiting for you to be ready to hear it." Standing there in the afternoon sun, with the torn pieces of the bill of sale scattered around their feet like confetti, Grace understood that freedom wasn't just the absence of chains, it was the presence of choice. And she'd chosen this man, this land, this life. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because there was nowhere else she'd rather be. "Partners?" she asked, holding out her hand. "Partners?" he agreed, taking it. "In everything." In the distance, thunder rumbled. Another storm approaching. But Grace didn't fear it. They'd weather it together, as they had before, as they would all the storms to come, because that's what partners did. They stood together, worked together, built something together that neither could manage alone. The past was done, torn up and scattered to the wind. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but theirs to shape. And in this moment, standing hand in hand on the land they both had claimed, Grace knew she was exactly where she belonged. The corn stood golden in the October sun, taller than Cole had ever seen it grow on this land. Grace walked between the rows, running her hands along the heavy ears, feeling the kernels full and firm beneath the husks. 3 months had passed since her mother's visit. 3 months of the hardest work she'd ever known. And now came the reward. "Never seen anything like it," Cole said, coming up behind her with the harvest ledger tucked under his arm. "We'll clear enough to pay off the seed debt, buy supplies for winter, and still have money left for next year's planting." Grace turned to him, unable to suppress her smile. "We did it." "You did it," he corrected. "That fertilizer method you remembered from your grandmother, mixing the chicken droppings with wood ash and working it into the soil, that made the difference." She shook her head, but pleasure warmed her at the praise. They'd become a true team these past months, each contributing their knowledge, their labor, their determination to make the farm succeed. The townspeople had noticed too, just yesterday, when they'd gone to Dry Creek for supplies. The banker, Mr. Harrison, had tipped his hat to her and called her Mrs. Drifter before Cole corrected him that she was Miss Mills, his business partner. "Mrs. Patterson's coming tomorrow with her sons to help with the harvest," Cole said, checking his ledger. "The Johnsons, too. Should take 3 days if the weather holds." "I'll start cooking tonight," Grace said. "Feeding a harvest crew takes planning." They walked back to the cabin together, discussing logistics, but Grace noticed Cole seemed distracted, constantly touching his vest pocket like he was checking for something. She'd seen him working on papers in the evening lately, writing by lamplight when he thought she was asleep. Legal documents, she assumed, related to the harvest sales. That evening, after a supper of ham and beans, They could afford ham now. Occasionally, Cole cleared his throat nervously. Grace, could you sit with me on the porch? There's something we need to discuss. Her stomach tightened with sudden worry. Had something gone wrong? Was there a debt she didn't know about? She followed him outside, where the setting sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. The air was cool but not cold, carrying the smell of ripening corn and distant wood smoke. Cole pulled a folded document from his vest pocket, the one he'd been touching all day. I've been to the land office, had these drawn up proper and legal. He handed her the papers with hands that trembled slightly. Grace unfolded them carefully, reading by the fading light. Partnership agreement for the Drifter farm. But this was different from the simple document he'd filed after the auction. This gave her full half ownership of everything: the land, the cabin, the livestock, the coming harvest profit. Equal partners in every legal sense. Cole, she breathed, looking up at him. This is half of everything you own. Half of everything we built, he corrected. You've more than earned it, Grace. The farm's successful because of both of us. Only fair you own half outright. She studied the document again, seeing her name written in official script, Grace Catherine Mills, equal partner. But something felt incomplete about it, like a conversation that stopped mid-sentence. She set the papers on the bench beside her and turned to face him fully. I'll accept the partnership, she said slowly, watching his face. But only if it includes all of you, not just the land. Cole went very still. Grace, I mean it, she continued, gathering courage with each word. I don't want to be your business partner, Cole, or rather, I don't want to be only that. These months, working beside you, building this life together, it's shown me what I want, and what I want is you, all of you, not just during work hours, not just as partners in farming, but as partners in everything. Cole's expression transformed, hope breaking across his face like dawn. Are you saying, I'm saying I love you, Coleman Drifter. I'm saying I want to wake up beside you instead of in separate rooms. I'm saying I want our names joined on more than just land documents. She took a breath, then spoke the words that would have horrified her proper mother. I'm saying I want to marry you, if you'll have me. For a moment, Cole just stared at her, and Grace felt heat rise in her cheeks. Had she misread things? Had she been too forward? Then he laughed, a sound of pure joy, and pulled her into his arms. If I'll have you. He pulled back enough to look at her face, his eyes bright with emotion. Grace Catherine Mills, I've been trying to figure out how to ask you to marry me for the past month. Been writing and rewriting speeches in my head, trying to find the right words. And here you go and ask me first. Is that a yes? She asked, though she was smiling now too. It's a yes to everything, he said. To marriage, to partnership, to building a life together that's about more than just survival. Yes to waking up beside you and going to sleep beside you and every hour in between. He reached into his other pocket and pulled out something small, a gold band, simple and worn, but polished to a shine. This was my grandmother's, he said. Been carrying it around for weeks, waiting for the right moment. It's not much. It's perfect. Grace interrupted, holding out her hand. The ring slipped onto her finger as if it had been made for her, the gold warm against her skin. They sat together as the stars emerged, planning in the practical way of farmers. A spring wedding, after the planting but before the real heat set in. Mrs. Patterson had already offered to help with a wedding dress, though she hadn't said anything directly. Just mentioned that she had some lovely white fabric she'd been saving. Grace explained, and Cole laughed at the older woman's not-so-subtle matchmaking. We'll need to add on to the cabin, Cole said. Can't have you sleeping in my room while I'm still in the barn until the wedding. Wouldn't be proper. Since when have we done anything properly? Grace asked. You bought me at an auction. I proposed to you. We're already the talk of 3 counties. True enough, but I want to do right by you. Grace, you deserve a proper courtship, even if it comes after the proposal. She leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him. We could build the addition this winter. Make it a real bedroom, not just a converted storage room, with a real window, glass, not just oilcloth, and a wooden floor instead of packed earth. Maybe even a door that doesn't stick when it rains. They were dreaming now, but dreams that could become real with work and time. The harvest money would help, and next year's crop would do even better now that they knew what the land needed. "I want to invite the whole town to the wedding," Grace said suddenly. "Even the ones who stood there that day at the auction. I want them to see that what started as their entertainment became something real and good." Cole's arm tightened around her. "You sure we could just have a small ceremony? Just the Pattersons and a few others?" "I'm sure. I'm not ashamed of how we started. Cole, you saved me that day. Whether you meant to or not, you saved me right back," he said softly. "This place was dying before you came. Just me and the dust and the stubbornness to keep going even when there was no point to it. You gave me a reason to make it better, to make it something worth having." The next morning, the harvest crew arrived with the sun. Mrs. Patterson took one look at the ring on Grace's finger and let out a whoop that could probably be heard in Dry Creek. By noon, everyone knew that Cole Drifter and Grace Mills were engaged, and the harvest became almost secondary to the wedding planning that spontaneously erupted. "April," Mrs. Patterson declared, as if she was the one getting married. "The wildflowers will be blooming. We'll have the ceremony right here on the farm, under that cottonwood tree. I know a minister in Abilene," Mr. Johnson offered. "Good man. Won't ask too many questions about how you met." "Questions?" Grace said firmly. "Let him ask. We've got nothing to hide." As the men worked the corn rows, filling wagon after wagon with the golden ears, the women planned. Grace found herself at the center of a warm circle of neighbor women, all offering advice, fabric, recipes for the wedding feast. She'd never had this before, this sense of community, of belonging. Sarah Johnson, the banker's daughter, shyly offered her own wedding veil. "It would be an honor if you'd wear it," she said, "after what you and Mr. Drifter did, standing up to the whole town's ugliness. Well, you gave a lot of us courage to stand up for ourselves, too." By the third day of harvest, they'd filled the barn with corn, keeping the best ears for seed. Cole and Grace stood together, watching Mr. Harrison from the bank calculate their profit. The number he wrote down made Grace's breath catch. "That's enough for everything we planned," Cole said quietly. "The addition, the new plow, the milk cow you wanted to get so Sadie has company, maybe even enough for glass windows for the whole cabin. And a hope chest," Grace added, then blushed at his questioning look. "For the future, for children, maybe. Someday." Cole's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "Someday," he agreed, and the word held all the promise of years to come. That evening, after the harvest crew had gone home with thanks and full bellies, Cole and Grace stood in their emptied cornfield. The stubble would be turned under soon, enriching the soil for next year's planting. The cycle would continue, planting, tending, harvesting, but now it would be their cycle, together. "No more sleeping in the barn," Grace said firmly. "We're engaged now. It's foolish for you to be out there when winter's coming. You can have your old room back until the wedding. And you—" "I'll take the barn," she said, then laughed at his expression. "I'm joking. Cole, we'll hang a curtain in the main room. I'll sleep on one side, you on the other. Proper enough for propriety, practical enough for two people who've already decided to spend their lives together." As they walked back to the cabin, their home, Grace thought about the journey that had brought her here, 6 months ago. She'd stood on an auction platform, worth $17.40 to the only family she had. Now she stood on her own land, beside the man she'd chosen and who'd chosen her, with a community of neighbors who saw her worth. The wedding would be beautiful, she knew. The whole town would come, would see Cole Drifter and Grace Mills stand together as equals, partners in every sense. Some would remember that auction day with shame. others with a newfound understanding of what human dignity meant. But for Grace, the real wedding had already happened. In 100 small moments of trust built through shared labor, in the storm they'd weathered together, in the choice they'd both made to see each other as whole people worthy of love and respect. The ceremony in April would just be the public declaration of a bond already forged. "Thank you," she said suddenly, stopping Cole just before they reached the cabin door. "For what?" "For seeing me. That day at the auction, not as something to own or use or profit from, but as a person who needed a chance." Cole cupped her face in his calloused hands, gentle despite their roughness. "You were never useless, Grace. You were just waiting for someone to see your worth. I'm grateful every day that I was the one who got to." They went inside together, to their simple cabin that would soon grow, to their shared life that would soon be official, to their future that stretched ahead full of promise. The harvest was done, the profit counted, the partnership papers signed. But the real harvest, the love they'd grown between them, the trust they'd cultivated, the life they'd built from $17.40, that was the yield that mattered most. Tomorrow they would start planning the addition to the cabin. The day after, they'd begin preparing the fields for winter. But tonight, they sat together by the fire, Grace reading aloud from the almanac while Cole mended harness leather, comfortable in their companionship and secure in their choice. They had found each other across an auction platform and a divide of circumstance, and in finding each other, had found themselves. The lamp burned steady between them, its light pushing back the darkness, making a small circle of warmth and safety in the vast western night. Outside, the wind rustled through the harvested corn stalks, whispering of winter coming and spring to follow. Inside, two people who had started as strangers continued the slow, sweet work of becoming family, becoming home. I've told you this story because I believe we all stand on auction platforms sometimes, waiting for someone to see our worth beyond our circumstances. Grace found her value not in her mother's abandonment, but in Cole's recognition of her humanity. And Cole, broken by his brother's betrayal, discovered that sometimes losing everything means finding what truly matters. You see, family isn't always about blood. Grace's mother shared her blood but sold her for pocket change. Cole's brother shared his name but stole his inheritance. Real family, the kind that matters, is chosen through daily acts of respect and recognition. It's Cole sleeping in the barn to give Grace dignity. It's Grace mending his shirt without being asked. It's standing together against storms, both literal and metaphorical. What moves me most about their story is this gratitude grows in the most unlikely soil. Grace could have become bitter, but she chose to see possibility in that barren farm. Cole could have stayed broken, but he chose to invest his last cents in someone else's freedom. They teach us that gratitude isn't about having much. It's about recognizing the worth in what we have and who we have it with. Sometimes the greatest gift is simply being seen, really seen, as worthy of choice, worthy of partnership, worthy of love.